it's Addie again, and today I'm going to show you how to reconstruct a men's button-down shirt. I actually filmed this back in July, so it is not really a seasonally appropriate DIY, seeing as it's like 60 degrees here in Wisconsin, but hopefully it'll be of some use to you. So let's get into it. I found this men's 2XL cotton Hawaiian shirt at the thrift store. I really loved the print, but I wanted to make it into something that I could wear. So after some deliberation, I decided to make it into a cropped top. The first thing I did was to cut off the sleeves really close to the armhole seams. Putting the sleeves aside for later, I laid the garment out flat and smoothed it out so that there wouldn't be any wrinkles, and then folded it in half and lined up the side seams so that everything was neat and symmetrical. Then I took a woven shirt that fits me really well and laid it out with the center front aligned perfectly with the center front of the Hawaiian shirt. And then using some chalk, I traced around the side seam and marked the shoulder point. Now to trace the armhole, I used a French curve and lined it up, but you can continue to trace the shirt that you're using as a template if you don't have a French curve. And then to true up the side seam, I used a hip curve, but you can totally freehand this. You don't really need any sort of thing to trace along as you're doing this. Then I cut out the armhole and cut down the side seams. Next, I needed to figure out what my hem was going to look like. So I decided to do a tie front style and a shirt tail and back. So I used my French curve, but again, you can totally freehand this to draw a convex curve down to the hem of the shirt from the side seam. And then I measured up to that point on the opposite side and drew that same shape again. Later, I'm going to be aligning it to make sure that everything is neat and symmetrical, so I wasn't too worried about it at this point in the process. Once I cut it out, I then folded up the front half of the shirt and marked a few inches down from where the front tie would be once I tied it in a knot, and then drew a curve up to the side seam to draw my shirt tail. Again, not making sure that it's super perfect left to right because I'll fold it in half and make sure it's symmetrical after. Next, I took the sleeves that I'd cut off and snipped off the extra seam allowance and opened up the underarm seam. This is going to allow us to reshape the whole sleeve to make it a little capped sleeve. After doing this for both sleeves, I laid them out wrong sides together and then folded it in half, lining up the edges. To make it more capped, I snipped off the top of the sleeve cap portion just because this is way too tall for my arm and sort of freehanded it to follow the original shape of the sleeve cap. Then I opened up the sleeve cap and trimmed along the front curve to again better follow the original shape of the sleeve. Then I refolded it, found the exact center point of the sleeve cap, and made a little notch there to align it with the shoulder seam when I sew on the sleeve. And then I trimmed down the sleeve opening. Finally, just to make sure that everything would fit okay, I opened up my front and back and then took my sleeve and sort of walked the seam together to make sure that the sleeve was still gonna fit okay, because I was definitely just eyeballing all of this. Next step was to sew 2 lines of basting stitching in the seam allowance of the sleeve cap. And then I pulled just the bottom threads to slightly gather it, making sure that the fullness was evenly distributed. Once it was slightly gathered, I began to pin it to the armhole seam, matching up that notch that I had cut and the shoulder seam, and then easing the sleeve in as I pinned to match up the side seam with the underarm seam. Next, I sewed along this seam. And then I pulled out the basting stitching from the seam allowance and repeated all of those steps for the other side. The next step is to sew the underarm seam and the side seam. So I lined up the 2 edges of the armhole opening and then pinned the 2 armhole seams and then pinned all the way along down to the hem. To help everything lay smooth and flat, I put down a top stitch along the side seam, and again did that for the other side. Next, I finessed the curve of my shirt tail and hem and the ties, so I lined them up with side seams matching and center front matching, just to make sure that everything is neat and symmetrical, and trimmed it to a length and shape that I really liked and was happy with. Once I was good with the shape, I took it over to my ironing board to press up the hem. So with the right side down, I folded up 1/4 of an inch and then pressed and folded up once more 1/4 of an inch to have a double fold hem. I continued all along the curve of the hem, keeping everything really narrow so that it would all lay flat and not get twisted along the really severe curves. Then I sewed a straight stitch along the hem and took it back over to my iron and pressed. I find that pressing is really key when working with woven shirts, especially cotton, because it just gives it that really nice finished look. And here is the final shirt. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments. As always, you can follow me on Instagram at AddieMarieHH. One more thing, I want to do a bunch of cat costume tutorials because, I mean, with somebody like this, why wouldn't you? So if you have any requests, anything you'd like to see, you think that'd be interesting, definitely let me know. I think it'll be interesting for everybody involved. Won't it, Pokey? Okay. All right, you can go. Thanks for hanging out.